What's up, guys, and welcome to another Virgin vlog. Nice to see you guys again. Nice to be here. I wasn't planning on doing an entry today, but I had kind of a stroke of inspiration, like I had a massive download out of nowhere, well, it's kind of a result of, my kind of recent kind of explorations, and also just my life in general, going on from, my previous few entries. Like, I've been kind of going through, a turbulent time, but of course when I say turbulence, I hold the position that, like, it's, or rather I see this as a sign that I'm growing, because I want to kind of go into this entry with the acknowledgement that basically we find ourselves in a very turbulent time, in history, in human history, right? This has been expressed by numerous sources that I've come into contact with. Like all of the people I follow, everyone is talking about how the world is changing. That, like, existing systems and structures are collapsing, essentially, right? And we find ourselves in this new, well, in this acceleration towards this, currently undefined, and very, very scary, kind of era, this new world that we are moving towards, right? And so, to anyone who's watching this, like, if you're sensitive to this kind of thing, like, you probably feel kind of, very, you instinctively feel like, you're on, like, it's do or die time kind of a thing. Like, you feel as though, like, some shit's gonna go down, and, like, you're, like, it's fucking terrifying, basically, like, you don't know what the fuck's gonna go on, you don't know if you're gonna be safe, you don't know if the world's gonna end or what, well, you don't know what's gonna happen, right? And as such, like, many of us are going through these awakening crises, like, where, like, the ego, which this entry is going to be based around, right, is ultimately cracking, both the individual ego of individual people, and also kind of this, our society, which has been predicated upon the ego, basically, like, this society, this consumer culture, that basically feeds on our egoic attachments, is ultimately starting to crack, right? And, like, and the result of that is a lot of, it hasn't manifested yet, but there's a lot of internal chaos. There's a lot of kind of, like, chaos that is underneath the surface, this facade of modern society that keeps running, but, like, at some point it's going to collapse. And, like, it's terrifying, like, if I'm honest, I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen, but again, if you have that kind of perspective, if you have the luxury of having, like, kind of explored internally as much as I have, right, then you're probably less affected than most people, like, you're the one who's like, oh shit, what the fuck's gonna happen, but, like, the people who, like, still pretend, or this, they're still kind of deep within that kind of paradigm that has been kind of running on the surface for, like, decades, right? Like, those are the people who are probably, like, panicking the most. They just don't show it, right? So, like, that's a bit more validation for all of you sensitive people out there. But anyway, that was a bit of a long intro, In this entry, I kind of wanted to, I'm winging it, honestly, because, like, this insight dropped into my consciousness. And it is essentially that we find ourselves faced with this dilemma, and, like, the this is obviously, taking this conflict that we're experiencing on a global level and looking at the spiritual component of it, right? Like, I've talked about the ego right? And how like I suffered like basically an egoic meltdown. And ever since then, like, things have been up in the air for me, but in a good way, again, because I expressed in that entry, I invite you to watch that entry, just to maybe find validation for your own, like, kind of problems in life, let's just say. But anyway, there is this sentiment in the spiritual community that basically goes along the tune of the ego is wrong, right? And I was watching an interview, just just before doing this entry, between Julian Blanc, the RSD coach, and also Ryan Holiday, who is a guy that I'm not very familiar with, but like, I've seen both of the interviews with him by Julian, right, on his channel, Julian himself. And the guy seems like a cool guy, right? But he wrote a book recently called Ego is the Enemy, right? And I haven't read the book, but like, I'm actually, after watching an interview, I'm actually interested in reading it, right? But in the entry, he talks about ego and how essentially ego is the cause of a lot of our unhappiness in life, which is accurate, right? It's basically what, myself and other spiritual teachers say, essentially, like, we use different language, like I've said ego. Teal Swan, for example, talks about detachment. And this is also, what this is pointing towards, is that like, when you place your sense of self-worth on something external, that is a recipe for disaster. Of course, I'm using Ryan Holiday's, apologize for that, if he ever watches this, but like, if from Ryan Holiday's kind of point of attack, which is not necessarily like the kind of deeper spiritual slash psychological definition of ego, he attacks kind of the more kind of, in his words, the common parlance, within the common parlance, where people define ego as being, essentially like a comparison of oneself to someone else, typically, right? Or when we feel superior to someone else or inferior to someone else, that is basically ego in the common sense, right? But yeah, so there's a sentiment that, all of us, mostly sensitive artistic types, we identify, or rather, there is a common perception that ego is essentially the thing that is fucking us up, in the same way that you could, that I've made the argument previously that your mind is something that gets in the way. My message in previous videos has been, tap into your sensitivity, get out of your head, right? And like, that isn't necessarily my own unique articulation. Other people such as, Real Social Dynamics, Tyler / Owen, he talks about this a lot, or did talk about this a lot in the past, where you get, getting out of your head, getting unstifled, as he puts it, right? But as spiritual / sensitive people, right, we do feel, right, and whether or not we're conscious of this, depends on how far we are on our spiritual journey, but we sensitive beings do sense that there is a conflict, there is an internal dissonance that arises whenever we try to attack the ego, right? Because a part of us, again, conscious or subconscious, it depends on where you are on the journey, a part of us knows that the ego is something that has a right to exist, and of course that's open to interpretation, it has a right to exist, but like, in essence, we try to attack it, and we try to attack it, and we try to like exercise it out of us, but we reach, the realization that kind of validates our initial feeling that there is something wrong with our attacking of the ego. We come to realize that, ego is something that's not going to go away. Ego is not something that's going to go away anytime soon, right? And herein lies my kind of insight, let's just say, for today, which is that Ryan Holiday says ego is the enemy. I say ego is the enemy sometimes. Ego is not necessarily the enemy, right? And bear with me. Like I'm just kind of winging this because I had this massive download, and I've been working, so like it's a lot more difficult for me nowadays. If you watch any of my previous entries, they're kind of more. I haven't done like a really deeply spiritual video for a long time. But I had a massive download today, so I thought I'd kind of ride the wave of inspiration and do one, as opposed to typically how I make these videos, which is to kind of wait a few days when I have the time and convenience to do a video, and then by that time the inspiration's kind of gone. But it's been okay recently because my videos have been touching on subject matter that's important, but not necessarily very deep on a spiritual level, and it's nice to do one of these entries once in a while, and I feel that, well, okay, so you may feel, as a sensitive person watching this, when you're watching other videos on YouTube, for example, of maybe people that you admire, role models, such as Teal Swan, such as Matt Kahn, such as Real Social Dynamics, any of these people that you follow online, Ryan Holiday, even, you might feel that there is, even, in the kind of message of these highly conscious teachers that are kind of basically leading the, riding the kind of the wave, as it were, the pioneer wave, all of these conscious teachers, despite them being, the conscious teachers with a heart-centered message and everything, there is still ego in what they do, right? And this is the crux of what I'm trying to articulate in this video, right? And I feel I'm a bit weird. I feel that the timing for me perhaps broadcasting this is a bit kind of untimely. I'm not sure, but herein lies the reason I'm doing it, right? It's because we find ourselves in an era where we're unsure, right? And bear with me, I'm a bit fragmented here, but okay, so there is a paradigm, again, conscious or subconscious, depending on how much we've analyzed things in life, but there is a paradigm, a societal paradigm, that basically goes along the tune of science and certainty are the only things that are allowed to exist, right? And under this paradigm, and this paradigm is directly linked to our survival, actually. If you look at any aspect of our society, this tenet, you could say, science or certainty is the only thing, is the valuable thing. It is the attractive thing. It is the thing that actually dictates the quality of our lives, right? And so, because of this, right, in order to survive, right, and again, this is really important, and of course, well, I'm sure you probably feel this as a sensitive person. It's just whether or not you've articulated it, it depends on your journey, but I'm sharing my articulation now, which is, we do live as a slave almost to, certainty, to, provability, objective provability, anything that is worth anything is certain, has been tested, and is definitive, right? And so even when you watch the most, not enlightened, but conscious teachers who are they're not salesmen, they're not these kind of internet marketers, who flash tits in your face, but they're people with a message, and they're known as such, right? Even their message is subject to this tenet, right? Because no matter how heartfelt their message is, no matter how conscious their message is, right, they still have to, they still feel the need to respect this kind of universal paradigm of science and certainty is power, it is love, it is attraction, right? I feel it, they feel it, and you probably feel it, right? But like, and of course, this is the juicy bit, right? You know, this is why we feel like when we watch these teachers, sometimes we're disappointed, or like we feel that something is off, right? And it's not necessarily that their message is wrong, because there's a lot in, again, okay, you know, when I say this, you know, I'm not trying to like derail anyone, you know, like, again, I feel like a bit of anxiety like talking about this, because like, you know, it could almost be perceived as if like I'm trying to tear down like, you know, these people's message or something, right? But like, I feel that like, well, if anything, you know, like for example, like, you know, like Teal Swan, right? She is the authenticity teacher, right? And like, by me talking about this, right, you know, it could be interpreted that like I'm saying that Teal is a fraud, right? But like, that's kind of not my intention, right? You know, rather it is that there is this divide between the intention to be free from ego. You know, this is the hottest spiritual topic right now. You know, how do we free ourselves from ego, right? This thing that has essentially run our lives, our entire lives, right? You know, and you know, humanity for many decades, probably thousands of years, actually. You know, I remember like watching one of Teal's entries, and she's like, yeah, we've been in these patterns for like thousands of years, right? And so like, you know, there's, you know, that is probably the most conscious message right now. It is to detach from the ego. But at the same time, right, whatever message that we put out into the world has to be subject to ego, right? Because I'll use myself as an example. I myself as pretty much a spiritual teacher, you know, like I'm not as prolific as Teal, but like I'm teaching, and what I'm teaching is spirituality, you know, so I am a spiritual teacher in a sense, right? You know, we are teaching people to be free of ego, right? But we ourselves are subject to ego. You know, I am talking to this camera, you know, and spreading the message of being free from ego. But like the mere act of me sharing this to the world is an act of ego, right? You know, why else would I share this to other people? Why would it matter if I was supposedly egoless? If like 100 people watch this versus like 1,000 versus none, right? It wouldn't matter, right? But like, I'm doing it because I do have ego, right? And so, whew, yeah, like again, I'm feeling that anxiety because like this is very controversial, you know, or this is very, very risky, you know. I hope I've explained this point far enough, because I want to move on to the next point. I'm just riding the waves of inspiration, but like, you know, like, we have to understand, you know, just to wrap this point up, that ego is something that living beings have. You know, the mere kind of intention to grow and to live is an artifact of ego, or rather that life and ego are inseparable. You know, like in order to reach for that is desired, from a law of attraction perspective. Again, this is another kind of topic that Teal Swan has been talking about recently. Fuck law of attraction. Her video where she did about that. When we live in a law of attraction based reality, ego is an inseparable component to that, because when we move towards what we desire, we must necessarily experience the contrast of not having what we desire, and so to live is to be egoic, right? And so currently, so currently, yes, the message is to be free of ego. That's my message. That is Teal's message. That is whoever else's message, right? We're all talking about being free from the ego, all of us conscious people, right? And that is a valid and valuable exploration, right? But it can become, as with anything in the spiritual journey, or like anything in life, it can become a pitfall, right? Because because we find ourselves in a universe that is predicated on duality and contrast, right? There is always conflict, right? At the heart of everything, there is a paradox, Do you inhale forever, or do you exhale forever? Using breath as an analogy for this, right? Because breath is what sustains life. But breath is the gestalt of the two components of inhalation and exhalation, right? And so, like, we as living beings, we have to be dynamic in the way that we approach life. Like I've made entries about this, many entries where I've talked about balance. I've talked about unconsciousness, which is basically not having resistance toward swinging from one side of the extreme of inhaling to exhaling. They seem, from a logical perspective, a linear perspective, or even just like, daily experience, they seem like opposite actions. It's like, using like one of real social dynamics examples, like success with women is a balancing act between freedom from outcome and I forgot how they said it. Freedom from outcome, but like clarity of intent. That's it. So on one hand, you have to be completely sure of what you're doing. You have to be clear and committed to what you're doing. So when you act, you don't hesitate. You don't second guess yourself, You don't go at it half-assed. You go at it completely, with all of your intent aligned to the action, right? But at the same time, you have to be detached from the action. You have to be detached from the outcome to such an extent that it doesn't fuck you up, basically. It doesn't cause you to stagnate and slow down and to close yourself from the world and from experience, right? And so, like, at the very heart of everything, there is conflict, there is contrast, there is paradox. What do you do, right, at any one given moment? It depends, that's the fucking answer to that, right? And so, when we talk about being free from ego, right, it is ultimately an impossibility, Again, it is a valid and valuable cause, In life, we must have movement, Like, again, I've talked about how, like, there were the people, when faced with this truth, you could say, they kind of go overboard, they take more action, they create more contrast, right? And then there are the people who just sit there and try to experience no contrast. But ultimately these two extremes, these two examples of these two like caricatures, you could say, like these archetypes, they will run into a brick wall at some point, because because life is, the product, the organism that is spawned as a result of like conflicting motions. We inhale, we exhale. We go out and we become extroverted, and we look for opportunities and resources, and we make connections. But then at the same time, we have to process those and go within and introspect and, heal, essentially, right? So, it's taken me a long time to get here. I was kind of debating whether or not to like split these into two parts, but I think I'll just keep this into one. I'll probably, I had like a title in mind, but I'll probably just make this like my messy spiritual like rant about shit. Of course, like I don't know if anyone's gonna watch this, but like I'm just writing inspiration. It doesn't really matter to me. My ego's dead. Like who gives a shit? And like of course this feeds into what I'm going to talk about. You could say the second part to this entry, which is hypocrisy is something that we all fear, right? Maybe somewhat more than others, right? But particularly the people who are like intelligent, conscious, spiritual, a lot of our trauma is kind of based around this idea of hypocrisy, right? Even people who are high achievers, successful people, I could see like that these people, based on my own kind of like, makeup, right? That like they are terrified, mortified of hypocrisy, right? And this applies to all of your conscious teachers, I put myself in that boat, right? Anyone, but like, there are people who are more successful than me, who have these careers that are based around this kind of conscious message, right? They too fear hypocrisy. Or rather, hypocrisy is something that they have to deal with on in everyday life, right? And because of like the paradigm that I talked about, which is science and certainty is the only value in life, right? If you don't have those two, you're pretty much fucking dead. You cannot survive, right? But like and so like even the most conscious people, like the way that they build their identities, the way that they structure their careers, their branding and everything, like it is based on certainty and uncertainty, right? In the sense that like they have to present a very clear and a very clear and defined image to the world, right? And like I do this in my videos, right? I don't show you half the shit that I do that's kind of a bit like fucked up / like weird and like doesn't really go anywhere, right? I'm kind of showing it a bit in this video, but like the typical video that you see on YouTube is like this how to cure this, how to be free of ego. You watch some of my videos, how to be free of ego, how to own your emotional instability, how to do this, how to achieve this goal, right? That's going to benefit you, right? But like the thing that triggers us is the fact that like these messages seem so clear, and they trigger even the most conscious message out there. It triggers us because like we're like this person. The thing, the image that they're presenting to me like seems so polished that like it makes me feel insignificant, right? And like, yeah, but the thing is that like ego is an inseparable thing from life, right? And so even the most conscious teachers, and like again, the only reason why I'm using like the most conscious teachers as an example is because like a lot of us feel towards these teachers, like of course like they're wonderful beings, like I fucking love Teal, I fucking love Matt Kahn, I love all of these people who are like out there and you know, and they're not fucking like, you know, they're not shoving tits in your face, you know, they're actually like facilitating growth, you know, and consciousness, you know. So I love them, right? But like at the same time, the reason why they trigger us is because they preach a message that is never like, no, even though it is conscious, it is nevertheless a product of this paradigm of certainty is everything, right? And the thing that they don't show, that we guess at, you know, with our own projections, you know, when we get triggered, we're like, you know, like, this person isn't all that. And of course we beat ourselves up about it as sensitive people, right? We're like, you know, why am I judging Teal, for example? You know, why am I judging her? Why am I judging this teacher? You know, like, they're doing amazing work, you know, and there's this dissonance, right? Well, these teachers, you know, when you think about it, right, you know, they're human beings. They have to deal with, like, shit that everyday people deal with, you know, like normal people. You know, they get frustrated, you know, they fall into the egoic trap of judging other people, you know, they probably, like, when you look at them and you're like, oh man, like, you know, this person, like, you know, they're so successful and, like, they're so lucky, like, they're probably looking at someone else that, you know, that is higher than them and judging themselves against them people, right? And when they make their videos, right, and of course this is selling myself short as well, but, like, of course, this, I'm moving forwards, right? This is really fucked up, right? You know what I'm saying? Because it's like our whole society, even our language, you know, I've talked about how, like, language has become something that defines us, you know, where once language was a form of symbolism that we used to point towards an essential experience that we were experiencing, that we wanted to relay to other people, you know, it has become something that defines us, you know. It becomes something that basically puts all of our consciousness into a box. Right? When we speak words, we are using something that is convenient, but it nevertheless puts our consciousness into a box. Right? And so many of us have to find, like, rogue maverick ways of expressing our consciousness, right? But, like, nevertheless, you know, like, the image that they're presenting to you in these videos, myself included, right? And you will experience this when you become a creator in this way. You know, if you make YouTube videos, if you make any form of thing, if you're a writer, if you're an artist, right, you will come to realize that you know that you only create when you feel sure of yourself, right? Isn't this the whole, like, thing with, like, creative block and, like, perfectionism and, like, procrastination? Isn't it? It's because of ego. And so we only create, we find these outlets that are expressions of ourselves, right? That we are our passions and love, right, you know? Like I've been talking about in previous entries, right? But nevertheless, we gravitate towards these because they are safe. Ego is about safety. You know? Hey! Ego is about fucking safety, right? And so we do these things that we love, and and we try to make it as kind of noble to our perception as possible. But there's still an artifact of ego. When I make these videos, when Teal makes these videos, you know, when Matt Kahn makes these videos, when Elliot Holtz makes these videos, man, I hope I don't get shut down for this, but, like, I might. But, like, who gives a shit, right? You know, this is for consciousness sake, right? When they make these videos, they are presenting to you a side of them that is under the intoxication of inspiration. Oh my god, how fucking progressive is this? How fucking controversial is this? It's like me, like, saying that inspiration, it might be a form of a form of medication. It kind of is. It's a fucking amazing, you know, it's very, like, it's more conscious than, like, liquid courage, you know, but it's nevertheless a drug that we use to make videos such as this, right? And so, with this in mind, right, can't you, like, would it be that far-fetched to say that, you know, someone like Teal is, I feel bad. I don't want to just use Teal as an example, you know. It's not about, I'm not trying to judge Teal here, you know. I'm not trying to judge anyone, you know. I'm just saying, you know, I'm just trying to illustrate this, which is that, you know, what you see in a video by someone that you follow, you know, could be me, could be anyone else, is a polished version of themselves. When they're not making videos, they might be, you know, drained, they may be low vibration, you know, they may be under the influence of ego, and they are. That's what you can understand, like, from the perspective of someone in this position of teaching people or whatever, spreading a message, right? You know, like, regardless of what stage you're on the journey, no matter how famous you are or how established you are, you know that you are a victim of ego. Because ego is an aspect of life. It is a feature of life. You cannot separate ego away from life, because life is about growth. It is about survival, right? And you cannot separate ego from that, right? And so, you know that ego is part of you, right? And of course, you have this. This crusade, because you know, like, you know, you want to give awareness to the fact that ego is something that imprisons you, but at the same time you can't, you know, like, it's, well, sorry, this is all over the place, but like, it's because this is so out there. This is so fucking out there, man. You know, this is really fucking out there, right? But like, you know, so like, in all of my videos, for example, you know, I talk about getting, you know, tapping into your sensitivity. Let's say, for example, I talk a lot about, like, freeing yourself of ego, right? Because freeing yourself of ego is the answer. You know, it is freedom for a lot of us who are stuck. The typical person who is, like, you know, stuck and, like, you know, they don't have what they want in life, you know, like, this might help them, right? But, like, it's weird, because when you teach to be free of ego, you're being the biggest hypocrite of all, right? And that could essentially become something of, like, this poisonous, toxic, I was gonna say blind spot, but, like, you know, like, area for you. Not, you know, and we have reached a point, essentially, where, like, our kind of fear of hypocrisy, our fear of presenting sides of us that are not congruent to any one image that is beneficial to us, because, again, you know, ego is based on survival, and, like, certainty, right? You know, like, our addiction to certainty, and only saying things that are certain and proven and safe. That is because, you know, of this survival instinct, right? But, like, we are reaching a point where potentially we can show all sides of us to people, but that will mean that, you know, the way that we have survived up until now, which is, like, trying to like hone our branding and our image and our identity as sharply as possible, will collapse, right? Because when you're that person, it's benefiting you, but it's also making, like, that feeling of hypocrisy, that fear of hypocrisy, is really fucking strong. Like, you know, I'm nowhere near famous, right? Nowhere near famous. I'm just some unknown Chinese guy, seriously, right? But like someone like Teal Swan, for example, using her as an example again. Oh man, like I'm sure she feels it, and I read some of her blog entries, and like she writes about this. Like it's like as a teacher of authenticity, like you're torn between like, do I say this to further my career, which is helping me, it's supporting me, it's nourishing me, or do I say that that like I'm a hypocrite essentially, and that is my message of authenticity. That is the thing that she probably deals with, right? But like where we are headed, where like essentially everyone is being equalized now, like because of this, the patriarchy, because like all of our constructs that structures that we're working with right now, they're all like an artifact of patriarchy. Like it is based on capitalism. Like he who has or she who has more or knows more has more power in society, right? And yes, even these conscious teachers are subject to this. As I keep emphasizing, right, as I keep stressing. But like, why did I say all of this? Because I'm probably going to try to wrap this mess of an entry up. But like, why am I saying all this? Just because I wanted to say it, honestly, But like as well, it is something that we need to face moving forwards. I think at some point, I don't think it's going to be the next step. I think I'm jumping the gun way too much in terms of like conscious evolution. I think this is probably the next step. I think it is probably the next step, which will see an equalization of the human race. It is going to be the collapse of this egoic structure that we have built in society, where we can no longer sustain these identities, these brands, because they cause too much pain, both to ourselves and to other people. For the people who own these brands and these images, right? They have to sacrifice their authenticity for this brand. And for the people who are watching these people, the plebeians, let's just say, I was going to entitle this entry like ego versus non-ego, celebrity versus plebeian, right? Because ego, I forget exactly why I wrote that, but like it's somewhere in my notes. But again, I'm winging this. But like, yeah, like for the people who watch these people, like they are torn. That they like because they resonate with the message of like moving forwards and like helping each other, but at the same time, like there is still that element of ego there, and so like there is still something that is at odds with that teacher's teaching, right? And the message that I have to give, essentially, the kind of overall message I have to give is that like we are all, regardless of who we are, where we are, hypocrites. We are all, victims of ego. All of us, right? And it doesn't necessarily serve any of us, to think that some people are less egoic and some people are more egoic, or rather that like some people are deserving of more from an egoic stance and some people are deserving of less, right? Because like we are all ultimately victims of ego. Yeah, this can get really deep, honestly. Like this can get into like death. This can get into like the the very basis of our existence. Like Teal talked about this in her entry "Fuck the Law of Attraction," because contrast and ultimately life as a dualistic component of death. Ego as a dualistic component that is distinct from non-ego, right? Non-ego being this enlightened nirvana that like spiritual teachers and the spiritual community talk about, right? versus ego, which is the, essentially it is the admission that we are human, right? Like, ultimately what I'm trying to do, and I'm sure all of these conscious teachers are trying to do, is to dissolve this, and like what this looks like, we don't know, right? But like, non-ego is ultimately where a lot of us yearn for, because being in ego hurts, when you compare yourself to other people, when like you feel threatened and you feel like you have to survive, this constant fucking stress that we feel just by being alive, that is why we are drawn towards non-ego. That is why it's such an attractive prospect, right? But at the same time, that prospect can be another kind of like mirage that takes us away from the essential understanding that ego is life. We are in this physical existence because we wanted to experience what we desired, and to experience what we desire, we have to push away from what we do not desire, right? And so like, this life thing, this existence thing, is basically this like constant tug of war between ego and non-ego, right? And until we are long dead and the universe dies and we manage to get to a universe, if it could even be called that at that point, when all of these physical laws, such as like, well, I say physical laws, but like spiritual laws, I should say, like the law of attraction, become obsolete and they become something else, we will always be under the kind of tug of the kind of constant pull of ego and non-ego. Anyway, it's okay to be a hypocrite. Like, I don't know if I'll actually release this video, but like, it's at least something I can talk about. Like, I'm talking about this maybe tomorrow or the next time. But like, I don't know if this inspiration will always be with me. That's the thing. Do I release this into the public? It's hella long, for one. Like, two, it's like, it's something that no one will be able to appreciate unless you're on the same level as me, and like, you're at least, this guy is at least saying what I'm thinking, but like, I don't think this is going to be to any use to anyone, let alone myself. This is honestly just a thought I had. Does it solve my life problems? No. Does it like stop me from being broke and going to a shitty job I don't care about? No. Is it going to ensure my success? No. Is it going to allow me to meet like amazing people and to have amazing experiences with those people? No. So like, who gives a shit, right? But like, I just had a thought, this high vibrational thought, the raw feeling, which is that like hypocrisy and ego is something that we cannot escape from, right? And so, don't let your triggers get you down, because we're all subject to this, and like, it just so happened that some people have had some advantages over others, I guess, and they got into beneficial places for them, right? But like, and like all of and the conscious teachers, they're doing great work, but like at the same time, like, if you're triggered by them, it's completely natural. It's because like, they, even though they teach consciously and they are doing amazing work for us, they are still nevertheless a victim of ego. And even though they teach about egolessness, ego is still a component, right? And now that I've had this understanding, I'll probably keep it with me. But like, I feel that like this is probably the next step. Once we've kind of like, I don't know. I don't know, but like this is probably where we're headed, you know. Death is ultimately where we're headed. Whether or not that, yeah. Anyway, I'm probably going to end this here. Like, I could talk a lot more about this probably, but like, if there's any take home from this, you know, and of course, like all of this I've discussed, you know, this is another transmission by another person who is speaking into a camera and putting on YouTube. So like, even me talking about this, I am still a victim of ego. You know, there are still sides of me that I don't quite want to share to the world. But like, I'm getting there, you know. I'm getting there. But like, you know, we all feel this, you know, we're all scared. We're all scared of doing something that we'll regret, you know, showing people stuff that like is going to mark us as like loose cannons or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I hope that was insightful, you know, like, oh man, this entry has been really wishy-washy, but like, if you're still watching this, you know, like, it's okay to feel kind of really weird at this point in time, because it's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on, you know, like, no one knows what the fuck is going on, and those people who like give messages that like sound really like high and mighty, of course it's great that they're doing that, right? But like, ultimately, you know, like, they still feel the same fears that we do, you know, it's just that they make this stuff that benefits them, ultimately, and also does its job to basically, again, you know, I'm using really, really like kind of like pessimistic terminology here, but like kind of sedates us, if I'm honest, you know. But again, it's weird because like the more that you go down this rabbit hole, like the less it affects you, you know, like because the ego, like you go down these really dark paths. But like again, even when I'm talking about this, you know, it's still ego, because the ego, as you live, you're constantly looking for like you face the ego, you know, aka shadow work, right? But then like in order to kind of like bring yourself back to a state of livelihood, like you have to do something that feels good, and when you do something that feels good, it is from a place of ego, right? Because that drive towards what we desire is inherently ego, right? Or rather, like, it is attached to ego. And so, like, our actions will serve to medicate us. They will serve to to cause us to be ignorant, essentially. You know, because like, you know, you know, they will lull us into a false sense of security with knowing. I know this, you know. But yeah, and that is the cycle, you know. Like we we face ourselves in the spiritual field, spirituality 2.0, as you know, putting it in Teal's terminology. And we you know, and then but then like, you know, that kind of pain drives us towards what we do want, and what we do want is more ego, you know. And then from that ego, we will fall back into the shadow, or rather, like, you know, the ego will land us into another scenario where like we feel pain, and it's like it's ongoing, you know. Of course, like, and like again, you know, the more conscious you become, like, you don't necessarily become happier, you know, you just kind of become more enlightened. And so like you become more objective, but you don't necessarily become happier, right? And then something will come along in your life that will knock you back into low vibration. You know, this is going to happen to me, this is going to happen to Teal, again using her as an example. It's going to happen to everyone, right? So like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, we're all fucked But in saying that, you know, like, we're all okay. It's been a weird entry, but like, weird in the sense of like, it is going against this paradigm that we all have. Let's be honest, you know, it scares me putting this out there. It scares me talking about this because I know I'm going against the you know, the paradigm, the societal paradigm. But but I'm going to share it. You know, it doesn't really benefit me. It might even give me trouble in life, pissing people off. But this is authenticity. This is authenticity. So cool. Anyway, I guess I'm going to end with that. It's been an hour. I don't know what I'm going to do with this video, honestly. I don't know if I'm even going to upload it, but like, we'll see. Cool. This is Bo. See you in the next entry. I don't know what I'm going to follow this up with, but I'm probably going to go back into like normal stuff I do. Hey. Hope you're having a good day. Peace out.